Вы, наверное, сочтете меня безумцем, но что если я скажу, что без Vigilante 8 могло бы и не быть группы Gorillaz? А как вам такое? Vigilante 8, игру, которую многие помнят и любят, сделала команда всего из 5 человек, и при этом она была технологичной, стильной и успешной. Всем привет, с вами Улетный Гусь. На моем канале вы уже могли увидеть разборы Vigilante 8, Vigilante 8 Second Offense, Vigilante 8 Arcade, а также фанатского порта на Unity с мультиплеером для ПК. Если еще не смотрели, обязательно зацените после этого видео. Чтобы логически завершить серию роликов, я решил попробовать связаться с кем-нибудь из разработчиков игры. Так я наткнулся на YouTube канал геймдизайнера Дэвида Годрича, который работал в студии Luxaflux практически с самого ее основания и принимал участие в разработке Vigilante 8. Мне удалось выйти с ним на связь через Discord. Несмотря на плотный график, Дэвид согласился дать интервью. Это заняло немало времени, но результат того стоил. Я узнал массу интересных деталей о разработке и даже получил редкие архивные фото. Пусть их качество уже и уступает современным стандартам. Дэвид, если ты это смотришь, извини, если я показался чересчур настойчивым. Что могу сказать о Дэвиде? Очень приятный и открытый человек. У него даже есть своя коллекция почти всех игр, над которыми он работал. Вы только посмотрите на этот уголок. А еще у него есть настоящая редкость, о которой мечтает каждый фанат Vigilante 8. Диск с игрой, подписанный всей командой разработчиков. Любопытно, что в Luxaflux Дэвид успел поработать дважды. Сначала на рассвете студии над Vigilante 8 и Star Wars Demolition. Затем ушел в другую компанию, где приложил руку к нескольким играм серии Twisted Metal, а позже вернулся в Luxaflux уже на ее закате, чтобы поработать над True Crime, Нью-Йорк-Сити. В отличие от Ричарда Хэма, у которого я брал интервью раньше, который ушел из геймдева в настольные игры, Дэвид до сих пор в индустрии. Он продолжает работать над проектами, пусть и не в AAA-сегменте, а в свободное время проводит стримы по автомобильным боям. Там часто всплывают Vigilante 8 и Twisted Metal. Ссылку на его канал я оставлю в описании. Загляните после просмотра этого видео. Кстати, меня поразил один факт, о котором я не знал раньше. Vigilante 8 частично повлияла на появление Gorillaz. Да, тех самых Gorillaz.
Voor Gorillaz, een logisch jaar. Een virtuele band. So Damon, this week you played a virtual gig in the popular Animal Crossing game.
I know, it's come to that.
Yeah. Are you a gamer yourself?
Well, to be honest, the only game I ever played was Vigilante 8, and I played that with Jamie, and that was kind of that's kind of how we bonded, you know, and came up with Gorillaz while playing Vigilante 8. So,
Wow.
yes,
That's where it all started.
But if you look at like the first video for 192000, you look at that, it's like it might as well have been in the Vigilante game, you know what I mean?
И еще один забавный момент. Билл Клинтон держал обложку Vigilante 8 в руках, когда делал заявление касательно рекламы жестоких игр на пресс-конференции.
I was given another ad that says, "What kind of psycho drives a school bus into a war zone? And here's a school bus heavily armed."
Подозреваю, именно поэтому в Second Offense Моло пересел со школьного автобуса на тюремный. У меня есть еще один интересный факт, но о нем я расскажу уже в конце видео. Работа над этим видео заняла у меня много времени и сил. Я плотно поработал с исходным материалом, сделал апскейл до 4К, чтобы крупные планы выглядели четче, минимизировал мерцание света, вырезал лишние паузы. Теперь смотреть стало приятнее и динамичнее. Для сравнения покажу, как выглядел исходный материал и каким стал итоговый результат. Кроме того, я подготовил русские субтитры. Если заметите опечатки или неточности в переводе, напишите в комментариях, я все исправлю. Буду благодарен за лайк авансом и подписку, если вы еще не подписаны на канал. Устраивайтесь поудобнее, берите что-нибудь вкусное, будет интересно. Не забудьте включить субтитры. Кстати, в плеере можно выбрать удобную скорость воспроизведения. Иногда Дэвид говорит очень быстро, порой наоборот медленно.
Alright. I apologize for this taking so long. Work has been quite a thing lately, and with summer break, I've had a lot of family events, so I haven't had a lot of free time to do this, but I wanted to make sure I eventually got this because you had some very good interview questions in here, and you were nice enough to reach out to me. So I'm going to tackle this and hopefully keep it around 15 minutes, which I think is the sweet spot for a lot of YouTube videos these days, and answer as many questions as I can of yours. I don't know how interesting it'll be for me to interview myself, but let's try. So we're gonna jump into...
Come on, let's go.
Your first question is, let's start a bit about me. How did I get into the game industry? What genres are closest to your heart, both as a player and a developer? How did I get into the game industry is really, it's kind of an interesting tale, but kind of not. So I went to school and was living in Virginia, mainly Northern Virginia. And one of my first jobs out of college was working as a contractor at the Pentagon.
What a twist!
This was a long, long time ago. Anything I worked on would be fully declassified at this time, and I can even tell you about one of them as I go into this. So I was working as a contractor out of the Pentagon, working on getting funding for the military. So I would do all their art and their briefings, and they would take these briefings and bring them to Congress, show that whatever program they're working on is worth the money, and then Congress would approve that money. One of the programs I worked on was the Humvee, which is fully declassified now because they're driving all over Southern California. So I have no military secrets left. But I was working there and doing a pretty good job. My boss is very, very happy with me, and an assignment came up that they wanted to send me to the DMZ between North and South Korea to work on briefings there, and they wanted to up my security clearance because I think I had like the lowest clearance at the time, which is like secret. So my boss told me, hey, if you're going to take this assignment, don't bring anything with you that you can't pack in under a minute, because you may have to run out of the base and catch a chopper out of there before North Korea floods across the DMZ. And at that point I said, okay, no thanks. I think I'm going to look for another career. My friend, who ended up working in films and also living out in California, showed me the back of a magazine ad. And I always thought it was Game Informer, but some people say that was probably EGM back then. And that was for a company called Black Ops Entertainment. And they needed an artist, a 3D artist and texture mapper is what it was called back then. So I knew nothing about games other than playing games initially on the PS1 and well, really, I've been playing games my whole life, but mostly like board games, tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons, old Atari, ColecoVision, Apple IIe games. So that was a good bulk of my youth there, was playing video games, even in the arcade, hustling for quarters, playing games like Gauntlet, Battlezone, things like that. But as far as like working in games, I knew nothing about it. So I took my time, would stay late after work and work on the computers there, learning how to do texture mapping in Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, but also in 3ds Max, I think is what it was called. So I built out an entire portfolio of modeled and texture map underwater vehicles and things like that, and applied to Black Ops, and ended up getting the job over at on a title called Treasures of the Deep, which was my very first game that I ever worked on. I worked there for many years, and yeah, many years as a couple, because that's a long time for the game industry at any one studio. And then from there, rolled into other studios like Luxoflux, because they were hiring up over there. So I'll cover your second question. What genres are closest to my heart, both as a player and a developer? As you might expect, I like vehicular combat games. I've made quite a bit of them. I've done all the versions of Vigilante 8, Second Offense, Star Wars Demolition, which I'm surprised people even know about that. That project was interesting. That was the last use of the Luxoflux engine, and somehow my bosses got the hookup over at LucasArts and got this contract. So we used the Vigilante engine one last time on Star Wars Demolition, which Lucas sent us over all the prequel art. We got to see Darth Maul and all the robots and the vehicles before anybody else saw them. Of course, they didn't tell us anything about it, so I had to literally make up what all the specials did and all the vehicles did, and all the weapon charge up and all those types of things without any direction from LucasArts, because I don't think they even fully fleshed out themselves. They even gave us like really obscure characters like Aura Singh, who's only seen once and never again. So I'm just like, I don't know what she does. She's got a sniper rifle. We'll do something with that. So, but yeah, I like auto combat games quite a bit. I really like survival games. Don't Starve, Valheim. Games like that are a lot of fun, where you get to fight and then build and survive. Those are some of my favorite that I enjoy quite a bit. What inspired me to become a game designer? I already kind of covered that. I did not want to go I didn't want to go to the DMZ in South Korea. Plus, I don't think that career, I say would pay very well. But back then, I was probably making 25 grand a year. And then when my first game in video games was like 27 grand a year starting off. So games weren't exactly high paid back then either. But yeah, I wasn't enjoying the military stuff, even though I loved living in Northern Virginia. It's a beautiful place. But because I'd played games all my life, and you hear a lot of people saying, well, I love playing games, so I must get a job at it. And that was kind of my philosophy back then. But that's kind of what got me into it. I love making games. I love playing games. I've been playing games almost all my life. I know you hear that a lot, but literally I've been playing board games, gosh, probably 40 plus years at this point, and then every other kind of console system and arcades that you can think of. So it was in my blood. I was also not the best student. I was a better creative than I was, let's say, in math, science, English, and everything else. So I leaned into my strengths there to become a game designer and work in the game industry, which is, I've lasted 30 plus years now. So that's quite a run. That's longer than most. So I seem to be pretty good at it. What was my professional starting point, and how did I end up at Luxoflux? So as I mentioned, my professional starting point was working as a contractor for the Pentagon, and then from there acquiring the skills I needed to break into the game industry, because there wasn't schools back there for games. Like literally there was nothing. You would occasionally read an article in a magazine, but a lot of it was just learning on your own, playing games, learning by playing with the software and figuring out, what poly counts you could have, what texture sizes you could have. We literally figured out everything on our own. It was the Wild West back then. Now today, you can take classes in game design, classes in programming, classes in computer art for games. And in fact, I actually teach at a couple of the colleges in California on those very subjects. So kids have an easier time of learning how to game dev, but there's also a lot more competition now than there was back then. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So that's how I kind of got started at my professional point. I perfected my craft, perfected for my first job at Black Ops, built out an even better portfolio there with the work I did on Treasure of the Deep and Tomorrow Never Dies and Agile Warrior were the 3 projects I worked on there. I then applied over at Activision, actually for a game called Battlezone, and it was the reboot of it being on the moon. I forget the exact name of it. Applied there. Activision really liked me. The team really liked me, but they had filled the slot like 2 days earlier, and they still had me interview anyways. I don't know why. So I left kind of dejected and went back to Black Ops, and then they called me back and said, hey, I know you didn't get the position over at Battlezone. Sorry, we filled it. There's another small project going on over at a company called Luxoflux. You want to come interview there? And I said, sure, I'll do that. So I went over there and met with the team, and it was literally, I remember going from Black Ops, which had a big office with like 30 plus people working on multiple projects, and I walk into the Luxoflux office, and it is the size of a garage. And there are 3 dudes at the time. I ended up being the 4th, working around a table, loose cables everywhere, low spec computers. I walked in, I met with them and started chatting with them, and they were just like, oh, hey, great to meet you. We just need an artist on this project. Contract, 10-month contract. I forgot how long it was at the time. They showed me what they were working on, and I was blown away. Like, the technology that they were working on was mind-blowing. Things were rolling downhill. Things have gravity. This is for PS1. Terrain deformation when the Crater Maker hits, or John Torque uses his Acequake. A lot of destructibility, stuff I'd never seen in PlayStation 1 era. So, despite initially being very worried about the stability of this company and the size of it, I thought the tech was so cool that I ended up accepting the job once they interviewed me and liked me. And then that kind of launched my career at Luxoflux. I ended up going beyond just doing damage and art for them and designing out a lot of their combat systems for the game during that development. So this might be answering some of the questions later on, but I'll cover them here just in case. So as I was building everything and testing the destructibility, I was also tuning the vehicles. I was creating the whammy system. I was creating the combo system with all the different attacks you could do, creating all the damage states for the various cars. And I ended up impressing my bosses enough that they decided to make me full-time. And I was officially number 4 at Luxoflux, which back then I think we grew to a 5-man team by the end of Vigilante 8 and stayed pretty small for Second Offense. But then after that, Activision liked what we were doing, and then we swelled up to like a 100-person team. But I wasn't there for the first True Crime. I was actually off working on the Twisted Metal series because they hired me away from Luxoflux at the time. So let's see. let's move on to another question. What does the number 8 in the title represent? This is in regards to Vigilante 8. There are a few online theories, for example, that it refers to the number of starting characters. Is there any truth to that? Yes and no. Vigilante 8 was both born from the amount of characters we had initially unlocked within the game itself, and the fact that our producer Morale wanted to tie the name of the game into something that was a short, memorable two-syllable word, but also refers to the V8 engine. So if you shorten it, V8 was for V8 engine, and we also just happened to have 8 characters. So those two kind of lined up, and everybody's just like, it's perfect, we'll do it. And we always joked about like, well, what if we get a higher player count for the next game? And someone's just like, we'll call it V12 then. And it's like, okay, it doesn't quite have the same ring. But it was like, you want a very short, punchy title, Vigilante 8, 2 syllables, boom. It also ties into V8, into a V8 engine, and then the 8 characters. So that's kind of where that came from. All right, your next question. I was generally impressed by Vigilante 8 from a technical standpoint. The visuals were great. The physics were impressive. Vehicles showed visible damage, and the maps were large and interactive. All of it felt extremely ambitious for its time. Compared to your game Twisted Metal, felt like toy cars driving around empty maps. How did you achieve the level technical execution? Did you build a custom engine or use existing technologies? Oh, that's so good. I like this one. Yes, V8 is very technically impressive, and what's really going to blow your mind is the first one we only had one programmer. He wrote the engine from scratch because there was no base PS1 engine, there was no Unity, there was no Unreal. You had to make your own stuff for PlayStation 1. He built the engine at the same time as he was doing all the gameplay programming, all the level hazards. He was an amazing guy. Adrian could do anything. He was like a wizard. I would look at the first to second Twisted Metal and be like, hey, they're doing this thing that we're not doing. And, can we add RAM damage to the cars? Because I noticed we don't have RAM damage. And Adrian would just sit in there coding away, and he'd look up and he'd look at me and go, I'll think about it. And I would run off to lunch, come back, and then, as I'm kind of finishing up my KFC or whatever it was at the time, walk into the office and he'd be like, okay, so you see this spreadsheet? This is a JSON file. Here's how you update all the mass, the physics, the RAM damage of the vehicles. Go nuts. And he'd coded it over lunch, and he would do that consistently. Like, it was crazy. But yeah, a lot of the technology of our game was pretty cool, and we did it with it was mainly him, with me and Peter kind of driving a lot of the ideas and the needs around gameplay and environmental hazards and stuff like that. But V8 overall was done with 4 people, with the 5th one coming on kind of towards the tail end of development. Edvard, who's a really good dude, I like him, very smart. But yeah, I don't know how they pulled it off. The physics were really cool. I remember constantly pushing Adrian to clamp down the physics because the cars flipped out too much and felt too floaty, and there was a lot of back and forth there. The vehicle showing physical damage was one of my responsibilities, and what we had is a second damage model that you would swap in for the medium damage and the heavy damage. But that model was also cut into like 3 sections. So you could do medium and heavy damage on the front of the car, but the rest of the car would be pristine if it had not been hit by a shot. All the environments had destructibility in there. One of our things was and I don't know if we can use this in your video, but our slogans was blow shit up.
Holy shit!
Vigilante 8, blow shit up.
PlayStation.
And I think we were the first fully destructible game, at least for the PlayStation 1. We could blow up all the buildings, we could blow up all the cars, all the weapons were destructible. The environment, the ground, the terrain mesh could be destroyed, deformed, scorched. I've never seen that in any other game. Let's see. And the large maps, our maps weren't that large. They ended up getting larger for Second Offense because we knew what the engine could do at that point. But I felt that the V8, the first one, levels were probably a pretty good size, with maybe Valley Farms and the Old West one being a little bit too large, but because that spreads out the overall combat pressure that you normally feel in smaller arenas. But yeah, the visuals were great. That I can attribute to Jeremy and Peter, who really pushed that engine. We did a lot of tricks as far as like making the visuals look really good. I know we used a lot of photos. Jeremy would go around and take pictures of everything, cars, buildings, and stuff like that. We'd use those to as the base for a lot of our textures. We used tricks too, like, I don't know if you know much about the PS1, but we could only have so much memory for a texture. So we had to pack them in very closely and use like a 64 pixel by 64, 32 by 32, which gets really tricky, but we would do interesting things like have a flat polygon on the top of a car that had no texture on it, but we would match the color of just the flat color of the poly to the texture itself, which would then like save us a huge amount of texture space on top. Or you could also take a texture and just use a couple of pixels of it and stretch it across something if it was a singular color. That was another way we'd save it. So we did a lot of cost cutting, things like that, so we could push some of the more needed textures into higher fidelity. And with most of these models, we spent most of the geometry on the backside and the texture on the backside because that's what you're looking at most of the time when you're driving around. That was an old PlayStation 1 type trick back in the day. So the Luxaflex guys really knew how to get the most out of it. Whereas I think Twisted Metal was a little bit sloppy in their textures and their environments. But yeah, it's as far as Twisted Metal, it was a completely different team, completely different engine, completely different philosophies over there. So the games are going to be very different. Twisted Metal definitely didn't quite have the level design prowess that I think the guys over on V8 did. So that was part of that. They couldn't push as many polys as we could either. Like I said, Adrian was a wizard. He could do things to really make things technically impressive as opposed to, like, let's say the 4 or 5 people they had on Twisted Metal. And I'm not trying to ding the Twisted Metal guys because I work with both and I like both of them. It's just some kind of magic happened on V8 with Adrian's ability, and it could have been a terrain mesh that he made, and that could have been, and I'm not a super technical person, I'm mostly design and art, not great on programming or technical stuff, but the terrain mesh that Adrian used that allow us to kind of deform it could have been a lot cheaper than potentially the modeled ground that Twisted Metal used for a lot of their levels, and that could have cut greatly into their poly count. But I don't know what wizardry Adrian used to make that happen. And yes, your last question, did we build a custom engine? Most of the engines were built custom back then. In fact, because we didn't have Unity and Unreal, anytime we went to a new system for like N64 or Dreamcast, Adrian and we brought on Carrie later, had to write these engines from scratch. So the N64 version is a brand new version, and it's actually probably one of the better versions, Vigilante 8, as was the Dreamcast. You know, we had to remake all the textures, up res or down res the polys depending on what. We had to change the music for N64 because it could only handle MIDI music and not CD music. Dreamcast was, because it's more powerful than PS1 and N64, we had to up-res everything, up-res the textures, put in a lot of extra bells and whistles and texture maps and VFX, things like that. So yeah, building a custom engine was a thing back then, because I remember talking to some of the PS1 programmers where space was so limited that they had to strip out everything that wasn't necessary for the game, including dumping the Sony libraries so they could fit a couple of more textures in there, which was kind of funny. They actually had a board, like a discussion board between all the programmers working on PS1 trying to share tips on the side without Sony or Activision knowing, because they were kind of sharing secrets, but they were all just like, how do we do this? How did you do this? Can you share this with me? I'll give you a tip if you give me a tip. So it was pretty cool back in the day. Like I said, it was the Wild West back then. All right, let's move on to question number 3. In Second Offense, you introduce momentum-based turning, where the vehicle continues to turn after you release the button. What was the purpose behind this mechanic? Honestly, I can't recall seeing anything quite like it elsewhere, and personally found it a bit frustrating. Yes, I honestly don't know how that change slipped in. It was technically the same engine from V8-1 to V8-2. I don't know if Adrian wanted to change some of the physics, if he made momentum carry the car a bit more. I think when we started adding a lot of like the hover attachments and the water attachments, it made our physics a little more screwy than they already were. I honestly don't remember adding that in, and I don't know why it's in there, and yes, it is frustrating. I felt the handling in Second Offense in general, even with the attachments like the hover and stuff, was very frustrating. If I could go back, I would try to fix that stuff. Let's see, number 4, what game ideas inspired you while developing Vigilante 8? Was Twisted Metal one of those influences? Why did you choose to set the game in the 70s? Oh, good question. What game ideas inspired you while developing Vigilante 8? Yes, Twisted Metal was one of those influences. And this will also answer your second question here. Vigilante 8 was, and a lot of people say this was not a clone of Twisted Metal, it was the Interstate 76 port from PC to console. The Interstate 76 team was too busy on another title, and Activision wanted a console port of it. So that's when they approached Luxoflux and said, hey, we know you want to do this other game, but would you be willing to do this console port Interstate 76? Which is where the 70s theme came from. Actually, if you did a side-by-side comparison, I actually have a video on my channel, which doesn't have the best title. It's called David Jaffe's Talking Out of His Ass Again, The True Origins of Vigilante 8. And it actually walks through this. But you can look at the cars in Interstate 76 and match them one-to-one to the cars in Vigilante 8, and a couple of the characters too that we brought over. So that's where the 70s theme came from and the origins of Vigilante 8. It's just that because we couldn't handle the huge environments on the PC that Interstate 76 could, the environments got smaller and smaller, and it became more arena-based and more action-focused because of the AI enemies were on top of you all the time. And Peter and the rest of the team started changing, some of the power-ups to make it a little more arcadey for the console and adding in better damage because we were a team of perfectionists and we really love what we did. When I had joined, there was so many significant changes between what I-76 was going to be and Vigilante 8 that Peter went and approached Activision and basically said, hey, can we make Vigilante 8 its own universe and divorce it from the I-76 game itself? And Activision looked it over, and I don't know what kind of things transpired behind the scenes, but eventually they came back and said yes. And from what I heard through the rumor mill is that the Interstate 76 guys weren't too happy about that, but this was no longer Interstate 76. It was wildly different. It literally became its own thing, and I credit to Activision. They allowed that to happen and supported it. And was Twisted Metal one of those influences? It was for me. I've talked about this a couple times on my channel, but no one on the team had ever played Twisted Metal.
What a twist!
They'd heard of it, but they hadn't played it. I, however, had been playing Twisted Metal and Twisted Metal 2 on the PlayStation 1 with my buddy who showed me that article in the magazine to go work at Black Ops Entertainment. So when I first came on and was playing around in the game, all it was driving around. You could have all 5 weapons on you at the same time, and you just drive around and you would just hit the button. And because they auto-aimed, you would just expire all your ammo and go pick up new ammo. It wasn't super exciting. Like it needed that extra layer of combat. So that's when I started suggesting things like, hey, Twisted Metal does this and they got combos and it's a lot of fun. I think we should do that if we want to compete. And Peter one day goes, okay, you can do these ideas. Like I just wrote up a quick sketch and then, like a one pager and the ideas. He goes, you can do these, but don't copy Twisted Metal. And I was like, okay. I looked at Mortal Kombat for the totals, aka fatalities.
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
And then I also looked at Tekken for the move inputs on how to initiate combos. So I came up with a bunch of combos for each of the weapons, or 2 combos for each of the weapons that were either extra damage, utility, or traversal, and then assigned them to a combo, giving a little bit more depth to the combat system. And then I also added the whammy system, which was not inspired by Twisted Metal. The combo system was because we needed a little bit more meat to our game and our combat system, but the whammy system actually was born out of I was testing the game one time. I think I was driving around with Sheila. No, it was a bigger car. Driving around with who was it? Gosh, who was it? Probably not relevant. Probably driving around Slick Glide because it's my favorite. Driving around, I corner Molo. I empty all my weapons on him, just rapid fire, switching between them. And Molo has, you can't even see a pixel of health in his health bar anymore. So Molo rolls off, gets a shield that was like 10 feet in front of him. Using that shield, goes around and picks up a bunch of hells, and he's back in action. And I was just like, this stinks. This thing's never going to end. So I got the idea of like, if I am doing basically a barrage attack on somebody, it should do extra damage to prevent this type of thing happening. So I came up with a whammy system. If you can hit a car within half a second with 2 different weapons, and you can, or more, you can get double damage, triple damage, quadruple damage, and it would just build all the way up to, I think, Sheila has like 15 times at most, and end a car pretty quickly. And it became a pretty fun skill-based attack system that I actually haven't seen to this day. Rewards high skill players for creating their own combo system that causes extra damage, which was a lot of fun. So let's see. On to the next question. Alternate fire modes. I already covered that. I should read these questions ahead of time. Alternate fire modes were something that really set Vigilante 8 apart. I can't think of any games from that time that had anything like it. How did that idea come about? about? Was the special input mechanic similar to fighting game combos? I'm sorry I answered all of this. Intentional from the start, or was that a happy accident? I'll cover this real quick since I already covered it. How did the idea come about? It came about a little bit from the Twisted Metal series where they could do things like freeze attacks and oil slicks, but I mean, really their only combos back then was just like shield, freeze, and then I think like a mine and oil slick, which were kind of blah. We already had a mine system in place on Vigilante 8 before I even joined, so that didn't even come out of that. But the combo system was just like, I wanted more depth to our combat system because I know we couldn't compete with Twisted Metal if we did not have an extra layer on top of that. And once I was kind of given the green light, I kind of went wild with it. I was just like, you know what? We're not just going to have generic combos like a shield or like a jump or a freeze. And Peter told me not to make this like Twisted Metal. I was a big Tekken player back in the day. I got some inspiration on like what kind of moves felt good. I looked at each of the weapons and said, I want this thing, they already do damage, so I either want them to do burst damage, have some kind of defensive utility, or some kind of movement. Looked at the weapons just like, okay, the missile, if it stays attached when you use it, should probably be a turbo. Or because it's a light weapon, it should probably give up extra heat and become like a Halo decoy type weapon that would, draw on other seeking weapons. So I started mapping them one-to-one what kind of made sense as to what these base weapons could turn into, could do that were interesting within the game. And some of them are just silly fun, the turtle turnover or the cowpuncher, which are mainly like defensive get off me type weapons, but don't do any damage. But you can combine them with other combos to do some pretty fun things. So that's where that came about. The special input mechanic, similar to fighting games, was very intentional. That was the only way I could get it past Peter not being like Twisted Metal. No, it was not a happy accident. This is all very intentional. This was all in response to Twisted Metal because, as I mentioned earlier, the team hadn't played it, and just driving around these environments and just fire, pick up new crate, fire, felt very flat to me, especially with my background in playing fighting games and my experience with Twisted Metal. So I wanted to be able to go toe-to-toe with them. So I really pushed our single programmer to get in all these extra bells and whistles, and he did, and it was amazing. All of them didn't turn out exactly like I wanted, but they all turned out pretty good. Next question. The level-based missions, also an unusual choice for vehicular combat game. Before Vigilante 8, I don't recall any games in the genre giving players objectives beyond destroying everyone on the map. Other genres, I can't recall any either. That doesn't mean there weren't some of them out there, but not in the mainstream, I would say. Why did you decide to include mission objectives? To me, they slightly slowed down the pace of the momentum of the gameplay, especially in Second Offense, yes. Where missions involve finding and collecting objects. Personally, I didn't find those tasks very engaging. Yes, so where did those missions were an unusual choice, and they kind of came out of nowhere. Vigilante 8 was just going to be a couch co-op, single-player, drive around, shoot 'em up type game. Activision came to us, I think, like the last 2 months before beta, and said, hey, we want to put on the box art that we have X amount of gameplay, and right now when we're playing through this, we only have this amount of gameplay. Can you figure out a way to extend gameplay that just isn't combat? And that's where Peter, to his credit, looked at what we had, because we couldn't really add any new mechanics safely. It would have probably broken the game and pushed back our launch date. So he looks at the game and he goes, what can we do in the game? We can destroy something, or we can not destroy something. So that's where he said, you know what? We can destroy buildings already, or we could not destroy buildings. There's your mission. It's evil to destroy, so the coyotes get those. It's good to protect, so the vigilantes get those. And that's literally where that came from. And to Adrian and Peter's credit, we got it hooked up real fast. Unfortunately, Peter liked the extra mission system, and because it was already kind of now part of the V8 universe, it got carried a little too far into Second Offense. I feel like he felt it was rushed on the first one. He wanted to do it right this time. So he made them more in depth with like picking up briefcases and dropping them off and picking up various items and delivering to certain places or holding them until the game ends. I personally hated the missions. I do agree they slowed down the gameplay quite a bit. I wish we could have come up with something a little bit more elegant, especially the fact that they took up a weapon slot, which totally wrecked my whammy system. But it was also the easiest way that we could have a car pick up an item without it taking extra code, because it's literally just a weapon that doesn't fire. You pick those up, you eject them. But yeah, it was something I felt like we should not not have carried over or done something very different from Second Offense. But Second Offense was pretty beefy game, even though we brought on like 3 extra people, I think, 2 of them just to do the cinematics in-house this time. Our team was still small, and we decided to add on things like, oh, cars can upgrade to like 3 different levels. So that was actually 3 different car models. And then we added more characters, and then I designed all the special weapons for that version and went crazy with it. Probably a little too crazy, but I also thought they were a bit more creative than the first version, Vigilante 8. But yeah, we bit off more than we could chew with Second Offense, and it definitely was not as polished as the first one because we just added too much for the team size, and part of that was the missions not being as polished or as fun as they should have been. Next question. Did development of the sequel begin right after the original release? Development of the sequel, I think, started right like a month, maybe month and a half right after the N64 version. Because as I mentioned, the N64 version had to be redone from scratch. So we did the PS1 version, then we did the N64 version, which I actually got to do a bunch of fixes in there, including showing mission objectives on the map, added some new modes like endurance, and there was the smear mode, which is like 3v1, things like that actually the Twisted Metal devs ended up stealing that they admitted to me when I ended up joining their team like a year or so later. But after we wrapped N64, I think it was a month after that, we started on Second Offense. They gave us like a month off paid, which is really generous. That doesn't happen anymore in the industry. So Luxo did take care of its people, which was great. But yeah, it was about a month, I think. Next question. Why was the co-op mode for quest progression only added in the second game? Was it a feature you always wanted but didn't have time to implement in the original? Yes. So a lot of things got cut from the first game that ended up sneaking into the N64 game and the second version. And we wanted to have that co-op help you type thing, so a friend could help somebody with missions or fighting other enemies so that they're having difficulty, it wouldn't become a bottleneck for their gameplay. So that is where that came from. Actually, I forget. It might be actually the first time I might have been seen was in N64 and then got carried into Second Offense. It's been like 25 years plus, I think. I don't remember everything about it. But yes, generally new features that were popping in were ones that didn't make it into the first one. That's not always a good thing because, as I mentioned before, you can bite off more than you can chew. We were still a damn small team, especially when you're talking like Twisted Metal was, gosh, it must have been 18 to 24 on the first 1 and 2, and then swelled up into the 30s, maybe even 40s on like Black and some of the other titles. So making V8, the first one with 4.5 people, and then the second one with I think like 8 people. Might be less than that. It might be 7. It was pretty impressive. But again, got to keep your projects in scope for small teams. And we had a tendency to not do that. Next question, number 9. I do have a couple of nitpicks about Vigilante 8 interface. Why weren't alternate fire modes and their activation methods clearly explained in the game itself? Similarly, buffs weren't clearly described, and the effects had to be figured out through trial and error. Helpful tips only started appearing in Second Offense, and even then, only briefly during loading screens. Am I right in assuming all of this was explained in the manual that came in the game box? You are correct in assuming that all of the tips of like combos, power-ups, stuff like that were actually in the manual for the Vigilante 1. And there's 2 main reasons for that. Is A, we didn't think of putting these tips in because this is like PS1 era. We're still trying to figure out as an industry as a whole of like what a game is and what best practices are. Anytime somebody did something interesting, we'd be like, oh my God, we got to put that in the game, you know, or we're going to learn from that. Like a good example is, what was it? First Half-Life is, you know, in that it was revolutionary to not have people learn by trial and error. They'd have you run into like an NPC. That NPC be like, quick, here, let me show you, follow the way, you know, or follow me. And they'd run down a hall and immediately get eaten by a monster to inform the player that they were there. But before then, they would just let people get eaten and get frustrated about that stuff. So we didn't know about putting this stuff in. I think it might have been me. Actually, I'm pretty sure it was me who said, oh crap, how do we explain this to the player? Let's put this into the game manual. But also Activision wasn't too hell-bent on us explaining everything because I had to write a strategy guide for this, and withholding a lot lot of these secrets allowed us to write that strategy guide and sell it. And Activision got an X amount of profits. In fact, all of the game debug codes that you would, like invulnerability and other things that you use to debug a game quickly and figure out what's working and not working, we had to withhold those and then change the code so that QA couldn't leak it. And then Activision would also use those to basically, bribe magazines to put us on the cover of their magazine or feature us in there if we gave them one of these game code exclusives. So, you'd have like a Game Informer or something like that saying, look, strategy guide that, for Vigilante 8, and it has this, and then they would put it on the cover. That's a way that helped us move units, was kind of withholding some of this information. We got a little bit more generous with Second Defense and learned the lessons about people complaining, like, I don't know how to do this and that. Like, a lot of people, even to this day, don't even understand there was a combo or whammy system, and that's because we didn't show them. And really, tutorials weren't a thing back then. That stuff started to roll around in the Ratchet & Clank era. But looking back, I wouldn't have minded having a quick tutorial in there just to show some of this stuff. But it was just a sign of the times. Like, we didn't know any better. All right, let's move on to the next one. Just so you know, I never actually held a licensed PS1 disc in my hands. Official copies were a rarity in Russia during my childhood, as were blue jeans, I would imagine. Here's an extra question while you're on the topic of the 90s industry. What led to the shift towards including tutorials? I should have read ahead. I didn't. It's like we're thinking the same thing here. What led to the shift towards including tutorials directly in games by the late 90s? For example, Siphon Filter already had instruction video that taught controls. Before that, players were often left to figure out what each button did on their own. What led to tutorials coming about was a reduction in frustration, but also making the game more accessible. Back in the 90s, like, games were really only for hardcore players unless it was an easy game, and that hit sales quite a bit. So people would go to a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video, which was like a VHS store around here where you could rent games or videos. They would rent it for a night, play the game, and be like, this is too hard, and they would put it down and never rent it again. They certainly weren't going to buy it. So removing the barrier to entry and the bottlenecks, getting in and having fun and playing is kind of where, at least in my opinion, a lot of these tutorials came from. I'll give you an extra tidbit here that's kind of interesting. The Ratchet & Clank series learned even more from this. Not only did they have tutorials that you had to play through to learn the game, but people who found the game too frustrating, the game got easier every time you died. And they didn't tell the player this, because a couple other games did this. Where they would say if a player died a bunch, the game would recommend they go to easy mode, and players' egos would not allow that. So Ratchet & Clank, the Insomniac guys, wanted to do this invisibly. So if you died a bunch, the game would become easier without telling you, so you wouldn't get stuck and put the game down or not buy it or recommend or negatively recommend it, or not recommend it to friends. So every time you died, X amount of times, the game would become easier by the players running around, idling between, cover points, but not, firing more infrequently, but they would never adjust damage numbers or health numbers on the enemies, because then the players could look at it and eventually figure out that the game got easier. I actually changed the system when I worked on a Ratchet game later on and said, okay, the game gets easier and enemies fire less and they idle more. But if the player doesn't die for a while, we start to ratchet up the difficulty again to become more of a challenge. So eventually it would find a good balance instead of just becoming permanently easy like it did in the original Ratchet series. So if you got really good, the game would actually go to a much higher difficulty than what you would normally play the game at. So it kind of got you in the flow state based on what your skill level was. Hopefully that answers that question with a little bit of extra incognito, or not incognito. Sorry, it's late here, I'm tired. Insomniac/Ratchet knowledge. Number 10. Why do you think Vigilante never got a sequel on the PS2, given the game's potential and capabilities of the new console? It could have been a major hit, especially considering Twisted Metal continued on PlayStation 2 despite mixed reviews on PS1. So this became a Activision strategy or / mandate from them. So they were tracking all the sales numbers of all the auto combat games, and they noticed that auto combat was starting to take a big dip. So Vigilante did really well. I think we hit like 1.3 million in sales, and then Second Offense started to drop off sharply. They also looked at the Twisted Metal numbers and said, oh shit, they're dropping off too. This thing's dead. So they didn't want to fund anymore. That's actually where Star Wars Demolition came from. Peter went to, I think, LucasArts, Peter and Adrian, and I don't know the exact deal because I wasn't part of that, but they got a green light from them, which then helped green light this one for Activision, Star Wars Demolition. But the sentiment was auto combat was on the way out. Halo was coming in. You could get in and out of vehicles. You could shoot. You could have the vehicular combat experience. The feeling was car combat is just in car, so it's not going to be able to compete with all the new games coming out like Halo and GTA and stuff like that. So they kind of killed it off. The only reason Sony kept it going was because it was their one of their bread and butter games. They had an exclusive there. They had a team ready to go with Black. That's why the series moved on to PS2. And Black was a decent hit. Like it made some bucks for sure. But at that point, they were also the only car combat, real car combat in the space after Second Offense fizzled out. So there wasn't a lot of competition. I suspect they gobbled up some of the V8 sales at that point. But if both of them were out on PS2, I think it would have been a different story for Black at that point as far as sales went. But yeah, generally the industry itself was kind of turning sour on car combat at that. And that's why there was no second offense or third offense on the PlayStation 2. And I think Peter and Adrian, the owners of Luxaflux, were getting a little burned out on making car combat games. I wasn't, and then that's where actually the Twisted Metal team scooped me up and had me work on Twisted Metal Black Online and the ill-fated Twisted Metal Small Brawl, which, despite being a very unfortunate development cycle, is getting a lot of fan love these days, which is it's kind of amusing seeing it getting a following 25 years later. But I mean, looking at it after Black, car combat even for Twisted Metal fell off. They couldn't get Harbor City out the door. They couldn't get 2012 got out the door and got just slammed in reviews. Head On, I don't know the sales on that, but I heard that was probably a mild success, if that. So car combat was definitely falling out of favor, unfortunately. Is it ripe for a comeback now? I think it is. With YouTube pushing around car combat and the numbers I see, people visiting for V8 streams and Twisted Metal streams and all the forums out there, everybody's crying for another one. Though I know recently, I think a year ago, maybe a year and a half, a studio called Fire Sprite Studios working on a live service Twisted Metal, and that just got canned. So it's not looking great for car combat in the current landscape, but we'll see. The TV series, Twisted Metal TV series that just came out, is getting good reception. That could spark car combat again. I would love to see a Vigilante 8 TV series at some point. Like, that would be great. A 70s aesthetic car combat TV show would be a blast. All right, next question. Did any funny or weird hacky solutions come up during development? Something along the lines, the famous Fallout 3 train, being a hat on an NPC, had to bypass engine limitations. Let's see. Were there any hacky solutions during Vigilante 8? I don't think so. At least none come to mind. Everything was pretty intentional in there. The weirdest thing we had was like the flip out bug, where if a car hit a certain piece of geometry just right, it would fly into orbit. But those are pretty fun, memeable moments. We had a couple crashes in there. One fun story I like talking about Vigilante 8 is we released Vigilante 8, and when you do that, the producer will take like the master gold disc and go off to a factory, give it to them, and they'll do a pressing. They'll do like 100,000 copies or something like that. And then that goes shipped out to the store shelves, and it sits there and then people buy it. To our surprise, the team didn't expect a lot out of Vigilante 8, but to our surprise, it sold out. I think we sold out like 300,000 units or something. And Activision during that time found a game-breaking bug. And we're like, oh shit. So they came to us and said, hey, don't change anything. Don't add anything. Just fix this bug. Because if you change anything, it has to go back to QA for like a month. And then when you fix that, we'll take another gold master, bring that, and have the next pressing, because we were, selling out over and over again. So Adrian went in and fixed the bug, and me and Adrian were on pretty good terms, at the time. And I was just like, hey, there's these two other things that are causing problems in the game. It was like the force of the cowpuncher was too much, causing the flip out, and something else. So I actually had him go in and make some gameplay tweaks without Activision knowing.
Yeah, that's right. Fuck me.
And then he went and he did that. We shipped off the disc. It got printed and sent out. And if you look at emulation, that's why there's two versions of Vigilante 8. One has the bug fix and one doesn't. And that was pretty common back in the day. Like Twisted Metal Black shipped with like 500 known bugs. And they were allowed to because, they were on their first party Sony, and Sony gave them a little bit of leash there. But that's the only one I can really think of that was kind of an interesting development story. But as far as like hacky stuff, to this day, people are still bringing up tiny little bugs here and there, but nothing egregious. So, all right, next question. What are your thoughts on Vigilante 8 Arcade? Have you played it? What kind of impression did you leave on you? Would you say it's a respectful delightful reimagining of the original and soulless nostalgia cash-in. So, Vigilante 8 Arcade, I have played it. I am familiar with it. Let me get some background context here. After True Crime 2, it did not sell to Sony's expectations, Activision's expectations, because they spent way too much on marketing and licensing all the music and getting very expensive voice actors and mocap actors, which one of them was the guy who played Darth Maul, Ray Parks, who I got to work with and direct him. But I also got to see him for the first time in Star Wars Demolition, the little character sheet, before anybody knew about him or saw anything about him. So it's weird how that kind of went full circle. Activision spent a lot of money thinking that True Crime was going to be the next, GTA. And while it made good money, it didn't make much money as I wanted. So they let go a lot, like half the staff there, including all the OGs, which two of them were still, I think, still under like golden handcuffs, so they couldn't start a studio or do anything for like a year. So they started up Isopod, and the first game they made was Vigilante 8 Arcade, I think. They made a couple other small ones in there. So they made that.
It's alive. It's alive. It's alive!
But most of the team, like me, were gone. I was gone off on Ratchet and Clank. A lot of the others moved on to Blizzard, so it wasn't the core team anymore. So, and they were on a shoestring budget from what I heard. So they hired a bunch of students, art students, directly out of the Art Institute who had never worked on games before. And it became an art-heavy, art-focused team from what I could tell, because they were making these giant environments with way too much detail in a lot of the buildings and the cars and stuff like that. If you look at a lot of the character bios, they're literally paint-overs of existing people. I think one of them was like Sam Elliott for Convoy, and it's just like, come on, guys. Like, this is getting egregious. But I'm familiar with the title. I played it. I used to stop by on my way to go work on Ratchet and Clank Size Matters and give them notes for like a half hour in the morning before I left. But they didn't really have a design team beyond Peter anymore, and it was me and Peter who really drove the design of Vigilante 8. So they had a junior designer on there who was doing very strange things with the specials and the combos and stuff like that. So, I mean, it is what it is. It made its money back and then some, probably based on the reputation of Vigilante 8, but I was not impressed with that particular offering. But I also get the fact that it was a budget title for 360. It is what it is. Like, I wish I could have had a bigger hand in it. I guarantee it would not have turned out like that. It would have turned out significantly better, because that was one of my main jobs, was just playing this game over and over again. I was playtesting the first V8 and Second Offense, playtesting it, doing all the damage destruction, doing all the combat systems, testing out all the special interactions and how things happen in environments, all the handling on the vehicles as best I could. So I don't think that was happening on the arcade version, but I don't know for sure. Maybe it's a new engine and a new environment. I will say I'm happy that they made it online multiplayer. That's something we wanted to do in the Dreamcast version, because Dreamcast had some of the first online multiplayer, and I remember suggesting it, like, oh wait, it can do that? Wait, can we do that? And of course I suggested like a week before the game was shipping, and there was no time to do that. But it would have been the first car combat game that was online multiplayer if that had happened. If only I could have thought of it sooner. But I don't know if technically we could have done it, since online multiplayer is a pain in the butt. You would need some very special coders to do that. Hopefully that answers that question. That wraps up everything about Vigilante 8. Now let's move on to some other topics. As I mentioned, you worked in the game industry during the late 90s, and there's something I've been wondering about for a long time. I even booted up one of the games you worked on, 007 Tomorrow Never Dies, to verify it for myself. And yes, it's there, inverted aiming by default. Why was that considered standard at the time? Was it actually seen as more convenient, or was it simply a genre convention? As far as Tomorrow Never Dies inverted controls, I think that was a genre convention at the time, because a lot of these games, especially Black Ops, had flight controls, which, if I remember right, are inverted. So push up to aim down in a plane and pull back to aim up. And I think they just carried that same system over into Tomorrow Never Dies from like Treasures of the Deep and Agile Warrior. And because it was the same engine, I'm about 90% sure that's the case. I don't know everything that went on with Tomorrow Never Dies. I only had an artist role on that, because game design wasn't even a thing back then. I kind of fell into game design. In a way, I kind of invented that position for myself by going in and tuning a lot of stuff on Treasures of the Deep. But for Tomorrow Never Dies, I think I was on that about 3 or 4 months, doing a lot of their art for that level before I left to go work at Luxoflux on Vigilante 8. So completely different designers making those choices. So I don't know for sure how that worked out. But looking at their other games, I'm pretty sure it's It's just because it was in their flight controls for the other games and no one bothered to change it. Let's go on to the next question. Also, while checking out 007 Tomorrow Never Dies, I was surprised to see something quite impressive. The ability to rebind most every button on the controller. What led to that design decision? Even today, many modern games don't offer that level of control, usually limiting players to just a few button layouts. Why do you think the more flexible approach didn't become an industry standard? That's a good question. Like I said, I wasn't part of the design choices on that particular project, but as I mentioned earlier with like the, the Unreal stuff or the Half-Life stuff, is my guess is it was seen in another game and we immediately started chasing that. Honestly, I think we might have done that in Treasure of the Deep. That might have been where that came from. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was, my buddy Matt was a programmer, I think, on both of those. If he was the one who pushed that, I'd have to ask him at some point. Sorry, I don't have a better answer as to why it didn't become an industry standard. It's extra coding and work and extra UI layout stuff. I think it's not industry standard because it's now a cost-cutting thing these days. Because back then it was cheap to have a programmer do it. Today you probably need like two programmers and a UI artist and a menu flow guy, and it's just like, screw it. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to save, $300,000 or whatever it costs to do that and just, put in our control scheme and call it a day. All right, next question. When working on Star Wars Demolition, did the engine require significant upgrades from Vigilante 8, or was it mostly a visual reskin with minimal changes? Yeah, Star Wars Demolition was the same engine. We knew how to push it a bit more, and it was mainly a visual reskin. In fact, we used a lot of the code from Second Offense in there. A lot of the specials for the characters are just reworked, revamped specials from Second Offense. Like the little pod racer that charges ahead is Obaki's special with some minimal code changes. Or Singh with her sniper rifle is John Torque's silver bullet attack. And if you look at a lot of them, Rancor was also Garbage Man. So it was a lot of reused code with visual skinning. So not a tremendous amount of changes there. And then we did our usual stuff where we had to upgrade the visuals for Dreamcast version. So we had to redo a lot of stuff in there. So that is that question. Number 4, of all the games I've worked on, which am I most proud of? Was there one that you may be a little embarrassed about or look back on negatively? If it's hard to name one, just feel free to list a few. Wow, you're putting me on the spot with this one. I am probably most proud of, I would say Vigilante 8, the first one, because we did it with a 4-person team. 4.5. I know I don't give Ed much credit as I should. I say 4.5 because Peter used to say that all the time because Ed came on pretty late. But Vigilante 8, doing that with 4.5 people, making 1.3 million in sales is just unheard of in the industry today. Like, that's crazy. I was also pretty proud of Twisted Metal Black Online. That was a pretty big accomplishment too, because we reworked Twisted Metal Black into a completely new game. I had to retune all the vehicles, all the specials. We added new game modes. We built new levels, and this was like a 12-person team. Despite what the credits say, Sony likes to add their name to everything, even if they didn't work on it directly. But yeah, those two I'm pretty proud of. So I'm looking at my wall up here. I actually have all my games that I worked on that have physical copies up here. Size Matters multiplayer, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters multiplayer, I'm pretty proud of too, but I think Vigilante 8 takes the cake as far as the one that I really am pretty proud of. As far as ones I'm a little embarrassed about, I would probably say Jak and Daxter Lost Frontier, Twisted Metal Small Brawl, which totally got shafted during development. Like, Sony pulled the entire team and funding, and we had to rebuild the team and the engine from scratch during development. So that's why that one kind of took a hit. Those two are probably black eyes in my career, but not without reason. Like, it wasn't like people just sitting around twiddling their thumbs and or screwing off or not knowing what they were doing. Lost Frontier, unfortunately, was a victim of crunch. Like, when we did Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, we were crunching a little bit, but when we moved on to like Secret Agent Clank and Jak and Daxter Lost Frontier, we were working 7 days a week, at least 60-hour weeks, if not 70, 80-hour work weeks. It slowly built up and just took its toll on us and in the projects for Secret Agent Clank and Jak and Daxter. Like, those are tough working conditions, and it definitely showed on the product itself. So it's funny though, as embarrassed as I was of Small Brawl, as I mentioned earlier, it's on emulation. It looks great and plays great, and it's getting a lot of love these days. Like, I know hundreds of people now who are praising it, which took me off guard because I didn't even want to put this one on my resume at the time. Like, it was crazy. What is your favorite game that you didn't personally work on? What, you like all-time favorite game? That's a tough one, and it changes year to year. But if I want to go by like my Steam numbers, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Valheim is a fantastic game. It is so much fun, and it has so much depth to it while still being fairly easy. Death doesn't have a whole lot of meaning in it, but it's a really engaging game, and I probably have 3,000 hours into that that thing, picking it up and you know, putting it down over the years. But that is one of my absolute favorites. Could I have a new favorite soon? Sure, but for now, that's the one that comes to top of head. Let's see, what do we got here? Next one. Am I right in thinking you've stepped away from working in mainstream game industry? If so, what led to that decision? Was it delusionment with modern game development? I have stepped away from AAA games. I am still working in the game industry, making games, but it's more for the tech side of things. Game industry has a very short life cycle. It's kind of like a professional athlete who can, you can be a pro ball player for 10 years and then your time's up because of injuries or you get too old. Game industry is a lot like that. Once you hit about, it used to be late 30s, early 40s. If you are not a director or the owner of the company, the fuse on your career is burning pretty fast. A lot of young people who come into the industry who have a tendency to push out some of the older dev workers. That happens with time. It wasn't so much that I got pushed out or I'm disillusioned. It's just I saw the writing on the wall with teaching at some of the various colleges. I saw a glut, an absolute flood of new developers pouring into the industry, more than I've ever seen. And I knew it was going to hit the industry pretty hard, and there was going to be less jobs out there. And I am being proven right now. The AAA game industry is burning down. We've laid off like 30,000 people in the industry, and studios are closing left and right. So I am very fortunate to have found a safe haven that allows me to work on games. I'm actually working with a lot of ex-Blizzard people and some other AAA people at my current studio, and we are talking about potentially spinning up something one day. I didn't walk away from the industry. I wasn't necessarily forced out, but the jobs that were popping up weren't in the game industry anymore. Proper, I should say. They're double A's and triple A's, and I'm working with a lot of devs, working on a lot of tech for games right now, which is very cool. I get to see where the future of gaming's going without having to worry about my studio shuttering, because we didn't sell X amount of units this year. So I do feel bad for what's happening to a lot of people right now in the industry itself. Ooh, I should turn on the AC in here. All right. But yes, I am game industry, but game industry adjacent. Do you think there's a chance that the vehicular combat genre would ever make a comeback? It seems unlikely that we'll see a Vigilante 8 remake or remaster anytime soon. Would I agree? And just for fun, if you're working on a remake or a sequel for Vigilante 8, what would you change, improve, or add to make it appealing to a modern audience? Okay, wow, this is a loaded question. Do I think the genre will ever make a comeback? Only if it's done by an A or a double A studio on a budget title, which is honestly the way you should do it. Do I think any publishers are going to fund one? Right now, I don't think so. I have been hearing from many studios, especially AA and AAA, that the publishers that they are approaching are getting like 10,000 submissions a year. And of course, they only pick one or two. Like, it is, the market is flooded. And for a vehicular combat to cut through that noise, it would be difficult unless you actually approach the publisher with a fully made game. Even with having credentials right now, it's not an automatic, you're going to get funding for one of these. And without funding, it's hard to make a game, even if you're AA or AAA, unless you're going to sell your house. And that's a hard pill to swallow because most games don't succeed. So you just throw away your house. But do I think it's ripe for a comeback? Yes. Like I said, I'm very active in the Twisted Metal community, the Vigilante community, other car combat communities. And there are so many people who are asking for this game to come back. And I think it would do well if you did it on a budget title. Don't do what they tried to do with Fire Sprite and try to make it a live service with a 300-400 person team, amazing cinematics and tons of detail. Go for core gameplay, go for PS2, PS3 era graphics as long as it's fun. I myself have been trying to track down the Vigilante 8 license with no luck. I was talking to a couple of people over at Activision right before the Microsoft merger. They are no longer there, so my contacts have dried up, but if I can ever get a hold of them, I'll see if I can get the license and do a remaster of it. I think it would have a good niche. I would also like to approach Sony and say, hey, do you want another Twisted Metal that, you know, is guaranteed to ship and on a budget? But it's really hard to get a hold of publishers these days when they got so many people approaching them. So that's tough. I want to see it come back. If I was going to remake a V8 sequel today, what would I change and improve to make it appealing to the modern audience? Good question. I'm not going to answer all of this because if it does come to fruition, I don't want to give it to rando developers looking here on this at your interview. But I would stay true to the first V8. I would polish up everything we wanted in there, make sure it has good online multiplayer, and then potentially have some kind of skill tree system for abilities or weapons that you could slowly upgrade through play and use to give players a little bit of a investment into the characters they're building out. I think would be a lot of fun. On top of that, I might bring back some of the hover attachments if I can actually make them work right and have them be a more meaningful influence on the gameplay, because the way we did it was a little bit gimmicky just to be something new. But I have a couple ideas on how to make them work well for gameplay. I think that'll wrap it up here. We'll cover your last little blurb here. Thank you, David, for taking the time to answer my questions and shed some light on the creation of Vigilante 8 and the decisions behind it. It was incredibly interesting. My subscribers just asked me to pass along their heartfelt thanks. Childhood memories gave them through V8. Wishing you all the best. Now, happy to do this interview. Happy to do it. It's just been super busy, so I apologize for taking this long, but hopefully this is useful to you and you can make something out of it. Appreciate it, and I will call it here. Thank you very much, and hopefully this is clean and crisp for you to use. Come on, window, move. Come on, window, move. There we go. Bye-bye.
Огромное спасибо Дэвиду за то, что нашел для нас время. Было невероятно интересно заглянуть за кулисы разработки культовой серии Vigilante 8 и не только. В знак благодарности подписывайтесь на его YouTube канал. Ссылку оставлю в описании. А если у вас есть возможность помочь Дэвиду вернуть права на бренд Vigilante 8, чтобы он мог попробовать сделать ремейк, свяжитесь с ним через Discord. Как и обещал, вот еще один интересный факт. По словам Джима Бака, ведущего программиста Twisted Metal, именно Vigilante 8 подтолкнул Соника к зарождению серии.
The Twisted Metal 3 is what it is because of that reason.
With Vigilante 8. So that you said that game is why Twisted Metal 3 exists.
Yes, I don't know if Twisted Metal 3 would exist if not for Vigilante 8 in a very weird roundabout way. So yeah, Kelly Flock, who was running Sony America at the time, had probably seen some early builds of Vigilante 8 or heard about Vigilante 8 or heard that Interstate 76 was coming to PlayStation, and Interstate 76 was a hotly played game in our studio. And then he's like, well, wait a minute, this looks like a car combat game. Oh shit, we have this, Twisted Metal franchise, though, it's kind of following a little bit at the moment because Single Track and Sony had some issues with their relationship. But he's like, all right, well, I don't want Vigilante 8 to come out and they become the de facto car combat game over Twisted Metal. So, oh crap, we need to get another Twisted Metal out. All right, who's available? Oh, there's that team in San Diego that I sometimes visit and drink beer with, and they're rolling off a racing game. So they have a code base that, runs cars around. So it's a starting point, right? So that's kind of how that developed, basically. Just Kelly Flock going, oh shit, we need another Twisted Metal game out.
Yeah, they wanted to monopolize the car combat.
Yeah.
So just no one else can have it. Only Twisted Metal, that's it.
Вот такая вот получилась интересная история у серии Vigilante 8. Если вам понравилось видео, не забудьте поддержать его лайком и подпиской. Это очень помогает развитию канала. Также буду рад вашим мнениям в комментариях. Заглядывайте в мой телеграм. Я делюсь мыслями и выкладываю мемы. А еще у меня есть предложка, где вы можете предлагать идеи для новых выпусков. Если вы хотите поддержать канал, информацию о том, как это сделать, можно найти в описании видео или на странице канала. С вами был Улетный Гусь. До скорых встреч!